People always told me I raised a good son. For 37 years I believed them. My name is Irene Calloway, and I am 63 years old. I live in a small house in Barrie, Ontario, the same house where I raised my son Joel. After his father left us when Joel was 4, I shoveled snow alone every winter. I worked double shifts at the hospital laundry 3 days a week for years, so Joel could have hockey equipment, school trips, a used car when he turned 17. I did not do those things expecting repayment. I did them because he was my child and I loved him. That is what mothers do, but there is a moment. And I know now that every mother who has lived long enough has felt it. When you look at your own child across a room and realize you are looking at a stranger. Not because he changed his hair or moved away or married someone you would not have chosen, but because his eyes, when they land on you, carry something you have never seen before. Something that looks, if you allow yourself to name it, like embarrassment. That moment came for me on a Sunday afternoon in September, in the dining room of a house I had never been invited to before. I should start from the beginning, because the beginning matters more than people think. Joel was 31 when he met Sabrina Whitmore at a conference in Toronto. He called me that same evening, which surprised me. Joel had not called me that spontaneously since university. He said, "Mum, I think I've just met someone exceptional." The word he used was exceptional. Not beautiful, not funny, not kind. Exceptional. I remember thinking that was a strange word for a young man in love to choose. But I was happy for him. I told him that was wonderful. I meant it. Sabrina was, by any measure, a polished woman. She wore her hair in a precise low bun, and had a way of looking at you that made you feel simultaneously seen and evaluated. She was pleasant to me the 2 or 3 times we met in those early months. Pleasant the way a hotel receptionist is pleasant. Correct, professional, but never warm. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself it was nerves or shyness, or the natural awkwardness of meeting a boyfriend's mother. I was telling myself a great many things in those days. Her father was Clifford Whitmore. I did not know the name at first, but Joel began mentioning it so frequently that it became unavoidable. Clifford this, Clifford that. Clifford's company had contracts with 3 provinces. Clifford had a property in the Muskokas. Clifford knew the mayor of Barrie personally. The first time Joel invited me to dinner, and Clifford Whitmore was there, I understood immediately what kind of man I was dealing with. He was the sort of man who speaks loudly in restaurants, so the tables nearby can hear him. He shook my hand once, firmly, and then turned his attention back to his son-in-law-to-be, and did not look at me again for the rest of the evening. I drove home alone that night, and sat in my driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The maple in my front yard had already started to turn. I remember watching one leaf come loose and drift down to the windshield. I thought, this is fine. Not everyone has to like each other. Joel loves you. That is what matters. The engagement was announced 6 months later. I found out by text message. Joel called the next morning and explained that they had been in Muskoka, at Clifford's lake house, and the proposal happened spontaneously, and everything moved so fast, and he had meant to call, but Sabrina's family was all there, and the celebration went late. I said congratulations. I said I was happy for them. I did not say that I had spent the previous night sitting in my kitchen, waiting for the phone to ring, drinking tea that went cold, telling myself not to be one of those mothers. The wedding planning was something I was included in around the edges. Sabrina's mother, Beverly. A name from the list, I realize, so let me correct. Sabrina's mother, Carol Whitmore, was the one who managed everything. She and Sabrina met with the florist, the caterer, the venue coordinator. When I offered to help address invitations, Sabrina told me the stationer was handling everything digitally. When I asked about the rehearsal dinner, Joel said Clifford was taking care of it. When I suggested, perhaps I could contribute something, anything. A family recipe for the reception dessert table, which I had made for every celebration in our family since Joel was small, Sabrina said, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, that they had already finalized the menu with the caterer. I was seated at a table near the back at my own son's wedding. Not the family table, not even close. I sat with 2 of Clifford's business associates and their wives, people who did not know Joel's middle name or his first word. Or the way he used to line up his toy trucks in a perfect row beside his bed each night before he fell asleep. I sat there and smiled and ate the salmon and said, yes, it was a beautiful ceremony, wasn't it? After the wedding, things shifted. Quietly at first, the way ice forms. You don't see it happening, but one morning you step outside and everything has changed. Joel stopped coming for Sunday dinners. He said they were busy. Then he stopped calling on my birthday until late in the evening, after I'd already gone to bed. Then the calls became less frequent altogether, and when we did speak, he had a new habit of mentioning Clifford's opinion on things. Clifford thought Joel should move into a larger role at the company. Clifford thought they should sell the condo and buy a house in Innisfil. Clifford thought Joel was capable of more than he was settling for. I would listen to all of this and wonder, silently, what had happened to the man who used to call me first when something went wrong, when something went right, when he just needed someone to talk to. There was a Sunday in February, the worst kind of Ontario Sunday, gray and brutally cold, when I drove to Joel and Sabrina's house in Innisfil to drop off a birthday gift for Sabrina. I had not been invited. I had called Joel the day before, and he had seemed distracted, but he said it was fine to stop by. When I arrived, Clifford's black SUV was in the driveway. I rang the bell. Joel answered, and something moved across his face before he smiled. A flicker of something I had no name for yet. He let me in. Clifford was seated at the kitchen island with a glass of scotch. He looked up when I came in and then looked back at the hockey game on the television mounted on the wall. I gave Sabrina the gift. She unwrapped it politely, thanked me, and set it aside. I stayed perhaps 25 minutes. Nobody offered me tea. When I said goodbye, Clifford did not stand up or turn away from the television. Joel walked me to the door and hugged me briefly. The kind of hug that is really more of a closing gesture than an embrace. He said, "Drive safe, Mum." Like he was talking to a neighbor. I sat in my car at the end of their driveway for a moment, before pulling out. The temperature was -17. I had driven 40 minutes in that cold to deliver a gift to a daughter-in-law, who set it aside without looking at the card, in a house where no one had thought to offer me a cup of tea. I told myself, he is under pressure. He is building his life. He will find his footing and come back to you. But he did not come back. He went further. The moment I spoke of earlier, the moment in the dining room when I looked at my son and did not recognize him, came on a Sunday in September, 8 months after that February visit. Joel and Sabrina had organized what they called a small family gathering. I had received an invitation, which I took as a hopeful sign. When I arrived, Clifford and Carol Whitmore were there along with Sabrina's brother, a man named Fletcher, and his wife, and 2 other couples I did not know. I was the only person at that gathering who had come alone. Dinner was formal. Someone had seated me at the far end of the table, which meant I could see Joel clearly from where I sat. Clifford was at the head, holding court the way he always did, and Joel, my son, my child, who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard when he was 3 years old because he thought they were beautiful. Joel was watching Clifford with an expression I can only describe as devotion. Clifford made a toast. He spoke at length about family, about legacy, about what it meant to build something that would last. He talked about the company, about the future, about Joel's potential. He did not mention me. He did not acknowledge that Joel had come from somewhere before Sabrina, before Innisfil, before Clifford Whitmore's world. As far as that toast was concerned, Joel had sprung fully formed into their family the day he married Sabrina. I looked at Joel. He was smiling and nodding. And then Clifford said something that I have not forgotten and will not forget. He raised his glass and said, "To Joel, who had the wisdom to recognize where he truly belonged." Where he truly belonged. I looked at my son. He raised his glass. He did not look at me. That was the moment. That was when I understood. I drove home alone in the dark. I did not cry until I was through my own front door, and then I sat down on the floor of my hallway, not even making it to the couch, and cried the way you cry when something is finished. Not the crying of grief, exactly, the crying of recognition, of understanding something you had been refusing to see. For 2 weeks after that dinner, I did not call Joel. This was not a decision I made dramatically or with any particular plan. I simply found, each morning, that I could not pick up the phone. My hands would move toward it, and then I would think of his face at that table. The way he had looked at Clifford. The way he had not looked at me, and I would go make tea instead. During those 2 weeks, I did something I had been putting off for 4 years. My own mother had passed away in 2019. She left behind a house on Penetang Street, some savings, and a sealed envelope that she had given me personally 2 days before she died. She had pressed it into my hands and said, "Irene, don't open this until the time is right. You'll know when." I had kept that envelope in the fireproof box under my bed where I kept passports and insurance papers and Joel's baby photos. I had looked at it a dozen times over 4 years. I had always put it back. I opened it on a Tuesday evening in October, with my tea going cold on the counter and the maple outside losing its last leaves. Inside was a letter in my mother's handwriting, and beneath the letter, a business card for a law firm in Collingwood. The lawyer's name was Albert Drummond. The letter was long. My mother had always been a woman of careful words, and she had spent considerable care on this one. She explained things I had not known. She explained that when she and my father had purchased their house on Penetang Street in 1971, they had done so jointly with my father's older brother, a man named Raymond, who had contributed half the down payment. She explained that over the years there had been arrangements, informal understandings, that had never been properly documented. She explained that Raymond's side of the family had been making claims on the property for years, not to her directly, but through channels she had only recently become aware of, but more than that. And this was the part that made me set down the letter and press my fingers to my mouth. She explained that the house on Penetang Street, the one I had assumed was simply her estate and nothing more, had been the subject of a trust arrangement she had set up in 2017 without telling anyone, without telling me, without telling Raymond's family. Albert Drummond had helped her. And Albert Drummond, she wrote, was waiting for my call. I called him the next morning. He was a quiet man in his late 50s, the kind of lawyer who does not fill silences with unnecessary words. We met in his office in Collingwood on a Friday, and he explained to me calmly and thoroughly what my mother had done. The house on Penetang Street had been placed into a family's trust in 2017, with me as the sole beneficiary, and a specific clause as ensuring it could not be challenged by extended family members regardless of any informal prior arrangements. But my mother had done something else as well, something Albert Drummond explained with the careful tone of someone delivering news that will take time to absorb. For 15 years, my mother had been quietly making investments. Modest amounts, consistently. A financial advisor she had trusted, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been her neighbor on Penetang Street for nearly a decade, had helped her manage a portfolio that, over 15 years, had grown into something I was entirely unprepared for. This portfolio had also been placed under the trust. It was mine. It had always been intended to be mine. I sat in Albert Drummond's office for a long time after he finished speaking. He gave me a glass of water. He did not try to fill the silence. I thought about the hospital laundry. I thought about those winters shoveling alone. I thought about the dinner in September, and Clifford Whitmore's toast, and Joel's raised glass. Then I thought about my mother pressing that envelope into my hands. "You'll know when." I drove back to Barrie, and I did not call Joel, but I did call my closest friend, a woman named Harriet Bowen, who had known me since we were both young mothers with sons the same age. I told Harriet everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Irene, what do you need?" I said I wasn't sure yet, but I was beginning to think about it. It took me another month to decide. In that month, Joel called twice. Both times the conversation was brief. He asked how I was. I said fine. He told me about a project at Clifford's company. I listened. Neither of us mentioned September. Neither of us mentioned the toast. On the second call, near the end, Joel said something I had not expected. He said, "Mum, I've been thinking. Clifford has a contact at the hospital board here in Innisfil. He thinks he might be able to help you find something closer to us if you ever thought about relocating." I was quiet for a moment. "Joel," I said, "I don't work at the hospital anymore. I retired 2 years ago." There was a pause. "Right," he said. "I forgot." He had forgotten. That was when I knew what I needed to do. I called Albert Drummond back the following week. We discussed options at length. There were decisions to be made about the trust, about assets, about the future. My mother had been thoughtful in structuring things, but certain directions required my explicit instruction. I gave my instructions. What happened next did not happen the way these things happen in films. There was no dramatic confrontation in a lawyer's office, with everyone seated around a mahogany table. It was quieter than that, and in some ways much harder. I wrote Joel a letter. Not an email. A letter by hand, on paper, the way my mother would have done it. I told him I loved him. I told him I always would. I told him that I had spent 30 years making sure he had everything he needed, and that I did not regret a single hour of it. And then I told him that I had been invisible at his wedding, forgotten at his table, and absent from his memory for 2 years, and that I had decided, not in anger, not in bitterness, but with clear eyes, that I was going to stop waiting to matter to him. I told him about my mother's trust, not in detail, just enough that he understood it existed, and that I had been to see a lawyer, and that I had made decisions about my own future that did not depend on his attention or his father-in-law's approval. I sealed that letter and mailed it on a Thursday morning. Then I drove to Harriet's house, and we had lunch and did not talk about it at all, which was exactly what I needed. Joel called on the Saturday. He was not angry. That surprised me. He was something worse than angry. He was confused, in the way of a person who has discovered that a room they thought was empty contained something they should have been paying attention to. "Mum," he said, "I didn't know about any of this." "I know, sweetheart," I said. "That was partly my mother's choice, but it was also partly yours. You stopped asking about my life." He was quiet. "I thought everything was fine," he said finally. "I know you did." There was a long pause, and then he said something I was not expecting. He said, "Clifford told me. He told me you were the kind of person who would always be there no matter what, that you didn't need." He stopped. "That I didn't need what?" I said. He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood it completely. Clifford had told my son that I was the kind of mother who would absorb anything, who had no edges, who would always be there, waiting, like furniture, useful but not requiring attention. Clifford Whitmore had told my son that about me, and my son had believed him. The weeks that followed were difficult in a way that is hard to explain. Joel called more than he had in 2 years. Some of those calls were good, honest. He said things he should have said before, and I said things I had held back for too long. There were also calls that were harder. Calls where I could hear him trying to understand what had changed, why the mother he thought he knew had become someone who sent lawyers letters and made decisions without consulting him. I tried to explain it gently. I said, "The mother you thought you knew was always there. You just stopped looking." But the other thing that happened, the thing I had not entirely anticipated, was Clifford. Clifford Whitmore, who had never in 4 years directed more than 10 words at me personally, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His tone was carefully measured. He said he understood there had been some discussions about estate matters. He said he hoped everything was being handled appropriately, and that if there was anything he or his contacts could assist with, he was available. I let him finish. Then I said, "Clifford, I appreciate the call. I have an excellent lawyer and a good financial advisor, and I'm managing everything just fine. But thank you for your concern." He was quiet for just a moment, long enough for me to know that the call had not gone the way he expected it to. Then he said, "Of course. Families should support each other." "Yes," I said. "It should." I did not say anything else. I let the silence sit. He said goodbye and hung up. I set the phone down and stood in my kitchen for a moment. Then I went to the window. The maple had come back in a small way, a few buds at the ends of the branches, the first ones of the year. March was almost over. I thought about my mother in that house on Penetang Street, making her quiet decisions, trusting her careful advisor, thinking about me, without ever telling me she was thinking about me. Leaving me something I didn't know I needed until the moment I needed it. She had known. She had known there would come a time when I would need to be something other than just a mother. When I would need to be a person with weight, with substance, with a past that couldn't be dismissed or seated at the far end of the table. I did not cut Joel out of my life. That had never been my intention. He is my son. There is no world in which I stop loving him. But I also did not go back to being the person who waited by the phone on her birthday, who drove 40 minutes in -17 weather and was not offered tea, who sat at the far end of her son's table while another man gave a toast about belonging. That woman was not gone. She was part of me, and I don't disown her. But she had served her purpose, and now I was someone else as well. By the spring, things between Joel and me were different. Not fixed. I want to be honest about that. Not the Sunday dinners of his childhood or the easy phone calls of his university years. But different. He came to Barry on his own one afternoon in April, without Sabrina, without any particular occasion, and we sat at my kitchen table and had coffee, and he told me about a project he was working on that had nothing to do with Clifford, something of his own he'd been thinking about for 2 years. He talked about it for 40 minutes. I listened. I asked questions. He looked for the first time in a long time, like himself. When he left, he hugged me at the door, a real hug, not the closing gesture kind. He held on for a moment. He said, "I'm sorry, Mum, for all of it." I held him back. I said, "I know, sweetheart." That was enough for that day. Enough is not nothing. As for Clifford Whitmore, I saw him once more at a family dinner in June that Joel had asked me to attend. Clifford was his usual self, loud, expansive, full of opinions. But something had shifted. He no longer spoke over me or past me. When I said something, he listened briefly and nodded. It was a small thing, a nearly invisible adjustment, but I noticed it. Harriet, when I told her about it over the phone afterward, laughed and said, "Irene, what you've discovered is that some people only know how to see what has value. The good news is you always had it. Now he just knows it too." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. There is something I want to say to any woman who is listening to this and recognizing something of herself in it. Not about money. I want to be clear about that. My mother's gift gave me options and gave me standing, and I am grateful for it. But the gift that mattered most was not the trust or the investment, it was the letter. It was my mother's voice saying, "You'll know when." Because what she was really telling me was this: that she trusted me to know my own life, to see it clearly when the time came, to act on what I saw. Too many of us spend too long arranging ourselves around other people's comfort, around our children's new families, our sons-in-law's business contacts, our daughters-in-law's catered menus. We make ourselves small and we call it love. And sometimes it is love, but sometimes it is just smallness dressed up. The house on Penetang Street sold in May. It was a good sale, in a good market, to a young family with 2 small children who were, the real estate agent told me, delighted by the maple in the front yard. I am glad about the maple. I am 63 years old. I have a good lawyer, a good friend, a son I am still learning to know again, and a small house in Barry with a driveway I still shovel alone. I would change some of what happened. I would not change what I did about it. My mother knew me better than I knew myself. She left me a letter in an envelope I waited 4 years to open, and in it she gave me the one thing I needed most. She gave me back to myself.